This isn't a daycare, old man. We need this space for real Navy personnel. Lieutenant Commander Jason Pierce's voice echoed through the submarine exhibit hall at the Naval Museum. The 76-year-old museum guide, Daniel Dan Whitmore, stood before him, quietly holding his tour group roster, looking at the young officer. He had been working at this museum for 35 years, but had never encountered such a disrespectful naval officer. Pierce was turning to his junior officers and laughing. This old man was interrupting their training session. The National Naval Museum, San Diego, California, was one of the most important maritime history institutions. Historic ships, submarines, aircraft, the entire history of naval warfare was preserved here. Every exhibit was a story, every artifact a sacrifice. In this sacred space, thousands of visitors came every year to learn, to remember, to respect. And at the heart of this museum, Daniel Whitmore had been working for 35 years. Don Whitmore, at 76, had completely white hair, a weathered face, with slight hearing loss in his right ear. He wore a simple museum volunteer uniform, navy blue polo shirt, khaki pants. Name badge D. Whitmore, docent. He had been doing this job for 35 years, giving tours, explaining exhibits, teaching visitors history. Quiet, knowledgeable, especially about submarine warfare, with incredibly detailed information. But no one had ever asked why he was so knowledgeable. Lieutenant Commander Jason Pierce, 32 years old, was a surface warfare officer, recently promoted, a young officer who considered himself the future of the modern Navy. He had served on nuclear-powered destroyers, but had no submarine experience. But this didn't stop him from expressing opinions about submarine warfare. This afternoon, Pierce and a group of junior officers had come to the museum for a training visit, to learn the history of submarine tactics. Dan was going to give them a tour. In a submarine exhibit hall with a retired submarines cutaway section on display, Dan was explaining Cold War-era submarine operations to the group. Gentlemen, during the Cold War, submarine warfare was a chess game. Stealth, patience, precision. Excuse me, old man, Pierce interrupted. We don't need a history lesson. We need a tactical briefing. Modern systems, modern warfare, not ancient stories. Don smiled politely. Sir, understanding history provides context for modern context. For modern context, Pierce scoffed. Look around, these are museum pieces, relics like you. The real Navy operates with technology you can't even comprehend. The junior officers were uncomfortable. Commander, one of them, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, said gently. Mr. Whitmore has extensive knowledge. Maybe we should extensive knowledge, Pierce mocked. He reads plaques and memorizes scripts. That's not knowledge, that's tour guide work. I've actually served on ships, real ships, not museum displays. Dan quietly waited. Pierce approached the submarine cutaway section, pointed at the sonar equipment display. See this? Obsolete, completely outdated. Modern subs have systems 1,000 times more advanced. This museum is teaching ancient history like it's relevant, Sir. Dan gently corrected. The principles of submarine warfare haven't changed. Technology advances, but the fundamentals. Don't lecture me about fundamentals. Pierce spoke sharply. I'm a naval officer. You're a volunteer. Probably never even been on a real submarine, just read about them in books at this point. The museum curator, retired Navy Captain Robert Martinez, heard the situation from a nearby office and approached Commander Pierce. Martinez said respectfully but firmly, "Is there a problem?" "Yes, there's a problem," Pierce complained. "This docent is wasting our time with irrelevant history. We need a modern tactical briefing, not grandfather stories." Martinez looked at Dan. Dan, everything. "Okay, fine, Captain," Dan answered quietly, "just trying to provide context." "Context isn't what we need," Pierce insisted. "We need someone who understands the real Navy, not museum volunteers who never served." Martinez's expression changed slightly. "Commander Dan has been volunteering here for 35 years. He's the most knowledgeable submarine expert we have." "Expert?" Pierce laughed. "Captain, with respect, he's a tour guide. Reads scripts. Real expertise comes from service. From actually being there." Dan quietly turned back to the exhibit, tried to continue the tour. But Pierce was relentless. "Look at this." Pierce pointed to the submarine periscope display. "He probably doesn't even know how to operate this. Just memorized the description from the manual." Don spoke quietly. "Actually, sir, periscope operation requires understanding of optics, range finding, target tracking." "I know what it requires," Pierce cut him off. "I'm an officer. You're just a civilian volunteer. Stick to your scripts, old man." Lieutenant Chen uncomfortably intervened. "Commander, maybe we should continue the tour." "No," Pierce was stubborn. "I'm making a point. The Navy is a professional service, not a hobby for retired people. This museum needs real naval personnel teaching, not volunteers who never understood what it means to serve underwater." This was Pierce's final mistake. Martinez's expression hardened. "Commander Pierce, my office now, Captain. I don't think that wasn't a request office now." Reluctantly, Pierce followed Martinez. The junior officers waited awkwardly with Dan. In Martinez's office, door closed. "Commander, you just insulted one of the most decorated submariners in Cold War history." Pierce looked confused. Sir, he's a tour guide. He's a former submarine commander, 30 years active duty, 10 years as commanding officer. And you just told him he never understood service underwater. Pierce's face drained. That's not possible. Martinez pulled a file from his desk drawer. Commander Daniel Whitmore, retired 1995, submarine service 1965 to 1995, commanding officer of 4 different submarines, specialized in covert operations during the Cold War. Pierce stared at the file, speechless. Those ancient systems you mocked. Commander Whitmore helped test some of them. Those obsolete tactics, he wrote the manual on several of them. I didn't know, ... double quotes obviously, because you assumed, judged, disrespected, and now you owe that man a massive apology. Back in the exhibit hall, Dan was quietly continuing the tour for the junior officers. They were now listening differently, respectful, attentive. Mr. Whitmore, Lieutenant Chen asked hesitantly. Captain Martinez mentioned you. You actually served on submarines. Dan paused. Long time ago, different life. What? ... What did you do? Don was silent for a long time, then served where needed, did what was asked. Pierce returned from the office, his face pale, his posture changed. He approached Dan and stood at attention. Commander Whitmore, sir, I owe you an apology. The deepest apology. What I said, how I treated you, ... inexcusable. I'm deeply sorry, sir. Don looked quietly at the young officer. Lieutenant Commander, you didn't know. How could you? That's no excuse, sir. I assumed I disrespected. I was wrong. The junior officers were now confused. Commander Whitmore, Martinez explained. Gentlemen, you're in the presence of a legend. Commander Whitmore commanded some of the most sensitive submarine operations during the Cold War, classified missions that prevented conflicts, gathered intelligence, kept America safe during the most dangerous period in history. Chen was amazed. Sir, you commanded submarines. Dan reluctantly nodded. 4 boats, 10 years as CO. Which boats, sir? Pierce asked, genuinely curious now. Dan hesitated. Some information was still classified. Can't discuss all of them, still sensitive. But, served on fast attacks. Boomers, special operations boats. Special operations, Pierce's respect was growing. Missions that officially never happened. Places we officially never went. Things we officially never did. But necessary. For the country. For freedom. Martinez added. Commander Whitmore participated in operations that, if the public knew, would rewrite Cold War history. Soviet submarine tracking, intelligence gathering, crisis prevention. He was there, in the depths, for America. Over the next hours, Dan reluctantly shared some stories. Not classified details, but general experiences. Life underwater, the pressure of command, the weight of responsibility. Submarine command isn't about technology, Dan explained. It's about the crew, about trust, about making decisions in darkness, in silence, knowing one mistake could kill everyone. Longest patrol? Chen asked. 89 days submerged. No surface, no sun, no contact with the world. Just the crew, the mission, and the ocean pressing down. Scariest moment. Dan's eyes were distant. 1982. Soviet submarine detected us. Cat and mouse game, 72 hours, both boats armed with nuclear weapons. One wrong move, one miscalculation, could have started a war. What happened? Stayed calm, stayed silent, outweighted them. Eventually they lost contact, moved on, mission complete. War prevented. Nobody ever knew how close we came. Pierce was listening intently now. All arrogance gone. Commander, how did you... How did... If you handle that pressure, training, crew trust, and understanding that my job wasn't glory, it was protecting people who'd never know I existed. That's what real service is. Days later, Pierce requested a private meeting with Dan. Commander, I want to learn, really learn, about submarine warfare, about service, about humility. Would you teach me? Dan considered. Those are classified or outdated. But about principles, about leadership underwater. Yes, months passed. Dan and Pierce held regular sessions, not just submarine tactics, but leadership, decision-making under pressure, respect for history and those who came before. Pierce's entire attitude transformed. Arrogance replaced by humility. Dismissiveness by curiosity. One day a special visitor came to the museum, a retired admiral, Cold War veteran. He saw Dan and froze. Whitmore. Dan Whitmore. Dan turned, recognized him. Admiral Harrison, my God, I heard you were here but didn't believe it. The silent hunter himself. Pierce was confused. Silent hunter, the admiral explained. Commander Whitmore's nickname. The Soviet Navy called him that. Couldn't detect his boat, couldn't track him like a ghost underwater. They feared him more than any other American commander. I just did my job, Dan said quietly. Job, the admiral laughed. Dan, you redefined submarine stealth operations. Your techniques are still taught at submarine school. Pierce listened, amazed. This humble tour guide was a legend. Weeks later, the Naval Museum held a special ceremony. The museum board decided to create a new permanent exhibit. Silent service heroes, the submariners who won the Cold War. Dan initially refused to be featured, but Martinez insisted. Dan, young officers need to know, need to learn, not from textbooks. From you. On ceremony day, hundreds attended, active duty submariners, veterans, families. Dan reluctantly took the stage. I don't deserve special recognition. Dan, I said, every submariner who served during the Cold War was a hero. Every crew that went down into darkness, not knowing if they'd return. Every family that waited, worried, not knowing where their loved one was. They're the heroes. But the museum displayed his service record anyway. Patrol pins, commendations, photos from different boats, a legacy of service preserved. Pierce, now genuinely humbled, gave a speech. Commander Whitmore taught me what the Academy couldn't, that a hero doesn't always look like a hero, that the greatest warriors are often the quietest, that service isn't about recognition, it's about duty. Dan continued volunteering, but now, young officers came specifically to learn from him, not just facts, but wisdom, not just history, but principles. One junior officer asked, Commander, why volunteer here? After everything you did, you could be anywhere. Dan looked at the submarine exhibit and smiled. These boats, these artifacts, they're not just metal and electronics, they're memories. Brothers I served with, missions that mattered. By teaching here I keep them alive, keep their sacrifice remembered. That's beautiful, sir. That's dutiful, sir. That's duty. Duty doesn't end with retirement, it evolves. Years passed. Dan eventually became too frail for regular tours. The museum threw a massive retirement celebration. Hundreds attended, officers he'd taught, visitors he'd inspired, submariners he'd mentored. Pierce, now a full commander, gave the speech. Commander Whitmore showed me that wisdom walks quietly among us, that legends don't announce themselves, that the greatest service is often invisible, unrecognized, but absolutely essential. The museum established the Whitmore Fellowship, an annual award for a submariner demonstrating exceptional service and humility. In the submarine exhibit hall, a new plaque was installed. Commander Daniel Silent Hunter Whitmore, USN Ret. Submarine Commander 1975 to 1995. Museum Docent 1995 to 2030. Faithful service above and below the waves. Dan passed away at 82, peacefully, full military honors. The submarine community turned out by the hundreds. Commander Pierce gave the eulogy. Commander Whitmore taught us that a submarine's greatest weapon isn't a torpedo or missile. It's the quiet professional who commands her. The man who serves without need for recognition. Who protects without expectation of thanks. Rest easy, skipper. Your watch is over. The depths are silent. Mission accomplished. The museum never forgot. Every new docent learns Dan's story. Every arrogant officer is reminded, respect those who served quietly. In the museum's submarine hall, visitors still pause at exhibits Dan created, still learn from the wisdom he shared, still inspired by the humble service of the man who commanded in darkness, taught in light. Sometimes the greatest commanders don't seek podiums. Sometimes they seek quiet service, teaching the next generation, preserving history one tour at a time. Daniel Silent Hunter Whitmore proved it. Depths to docent, classified to classroom, commander to teacher, always serving, always faithful. That's the legacy, that's the lesson. That's what it means to truly serve above the waves and below them, in war and peace, always with honor.